Well, the determinants of India's growth are structural, meaning these are factors which don't get affected by business cycles or even political cycles or economic developments in the rest of the world. These structural factors are well known. They are A, demography, B, openness, increasing level of openness and economic reform, C, rising per capita incomes or rising prosperity, and D, the large infrastructure deficit. So let me just explain quickly. Demography, as you know, just means there's a large pool of young labor force. The labor force of India is increasing faster than the population of India, and that has implications for economic growth. Secondly, increasing openness and economic reforms means that the country or the economy is engaging with the West or with the rest of the world in terms of trade and investment flows. And that, of course, is a plus factor. It's not, as I said, subject to any economic cycles, business cycles, or political cycles. It's a kind of a continuous process, and India's openness, that is, for example, trade to GDP ratio has increased from less than 10% to now about 40–45%. The third factor was rising per capita income, as I said. The per capita income today in India is almost $1,500. You know, there is an inflection point. For a poor economy with incomes less than $300 or $400 per year per capita are very low. But once you cross a particular threshold, that itself becomes a source of consumer demand. So I think India is near that point. And the fourth factor is the fact that there's a huge infrastructure deficit, a huge pipeline required of investments, which is going to actually power economic growth. So these are the structural determinants of India's long-term growth prospects, and that's why I'm optimistic. The Indian economy is an increasingly quote-unquote open economy, meaning trade and investment flows, both inflows and outflows with the rest of the world are increasing. It's an increasingly globalized economy. So the opportunities for companies or businesses out of the US or Europe are in terms of harvesting the economic growth of India. I just said that the growth prospects are strong simply because of structural factors. And it's also true that a large part of India's spending, GDP, comes from consumer spending. So there are opportunities from trying to take advantage of the big portion of consumer spending. As you know, 70% of India's economy is consumer spending, as against 38% for China. So there are opportunities from that market. But of course, there are opportunities from a variety of other sectors, for example, infrastructure. The stated goal is to invest $1 trillion in infrastructure in the next 5 years, as per the Planning Commission and the Prime Minister's statements. This will provide a huge incentive, a huge opportunity for infrastructure companies, or this whole area of renewable energy, and which requires technology, which I think has to come from Western economies. So there's a variety of sectors that I think pose opportunity in terms of technology flows, investment flows, as well as taking advantage of consumer spending in India. No, I think there are many successful Western multinational companies in India. For example, India is known for being an IT exporter. IT is a very well-known expertise, but not many people know that the biggest IT employers in India are companies like IBM. IBM has more than 100,000 employees in India. So when we talk about IT exports, we tend to forget that companies like IBM have been in India for a very long time, and they're actually using the workforce to service internally their requirements. We also have many multinational companies which cater to the domestic consumer demand, and they're holding their own despite stiff competition from local brands, local companies. India's automotive sector is now completely consists of foreign collaborations and foreign companies, right from Suzuki to Hyundai, Ford, Volkswagen, German companies. So in various sectors, I think you're seeing the multinational companies holding their own and being very profitable. Yes, inflation is a very big concern, and it's been rather high for the last 2 years, 2.5 years. There are a variety of factors. It's because of high food inflation. It's also because of higher demand coming from higher purchasing power. It's also because supply has not kept pace. It's also because of some supply chain bottlenecks. There's also the fact that commodity prices have been high globally. So for a variety of reasons, and high economic growth is of course contributing to inflationary pressures. For a variety of reasons, inflation has been high, and monetary policy is tried very hard. India is probably now the only country in the world which is still tightening monetary policy, and yet inflation is not visibly down, although people expect that it will come down by March. What tends to happen is that the monetary policy is, of course, tightening, but the fiscal policy is not aligned, or the fiscal policies are not helping keep inflation low. The fiscal stance is still somewhat expansionary. So it's a very major challenge, I think, to the Indian economy. As for the other question about whether India will fall into the middle income trap, I think it's very speculative at this point, because that's a very long-term question. Very few economies in the world have been able to break out of the so-called middle income trap, by which I think they mean that when per capita income starts rising from $1,000, $2,000 to $5,000, but then to break out of the $10,000 bracket. For a huge country of 1.5 billion people, to have a per capita income which breaks out of $15,000 per capita is a mind-boggling proposition. So I think I wouldn't want to speculate, but I know that this is a new concern of development economists, that why is it that only a few economies like South Korea managed to transit from middle income to high income economies, and many other economies, emerging and relatively less developed economies, continue to languish with per capita incomes of $4,000 or $5,000. I think that's an open question.